There's probably days where you are down and you find it tough to deal with, and you make the excuses and you look for excuses, but there's no point, to be totally honest with you. You're just going to drive yourself mad.
Speaking to a lot of elite footballers, yourself included, that say to deal with the pressure of obviously performing on a Saturday and a match day, if you prepare as best as you possibly can and leave no stone unturned, sort of cut no corners, the least you can do is give yourself the best possible opportunity to perform then on a match day.
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on. And there's nothing worse if you've not done the right things. And I'm not talking about superstitions or anything here, but if you've not lived your life right and done the right things in the week, and you know you're going into a big game at the weekend having not done that, there's no worse feeling. And that goes back to eating, drinking, but it also goes back to stuff you do in the gym here day to day, getting your body right and preparing right on a Thursday, Friday for a game on a Saturday. And it seems to be more and more football being played these days. So whether you're playing one game a week or 3 or 4 games a week, there's always things you can do right and prepare yourself in the right way.
So, you know, we touched on that season obviously being enjoyable for you. Must have been because you moved on to Championship side Wolves in that summer, and went from a relegation Bournemouth team to a Championship side in Wolves that were that the ambition was obviously to become a Premier League team. It was a complete contrast in clubs really. Could you give us a little bit of an insight into, at the age of, I think you were 18, possibly even 19 at the time, about what a move like that feels like at the time, and what that sort of did for you as a person?
Yeah, it seems to all happen really quickly, I suppose. Since I made my first debut within 18 months, I think, like you touched on, the club had gone into administration at Bournemouth, and they kind of told me before the season had finished that I was on the move. I was going to be moving, and I remember being pulled in by my parents, and he said, "There's a list of clubs, take your pick, basically, because you're off in the summer." So that was quite a big decision to make, and Wolves was the first one we spoke to and saw, and Mick McCarthy, and he made me feel $1 million. Went to a massive training ground. Suddenly there's this huge complex where I'd never been to anywhere like that before, and he turned around to me and said, "Look, you're going to be one of 4 strikers in the Championship next year for me. It's obviously down to you to earn your position, but you're going to be one of 4, and we're going to make a push for the Premier League," and that's what the club want to achieve. It's a massive club that suddenly, no disrespect to Bournemouth, but you're going from League One relegation battle in front of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 every week to suddenly pushing for the Premier League in front of 25,000, 30,000 every week, and there was a whole new pressure to that, and I loved it, to be totally honest with you. It was an amazing time and good to be part of. And that season for me, I made, I think, quite a few appearances. I can't remember how many, but I think it was great to then be playing a whole new level of football in the Championship, and ended up getting promoted that year with Wolves. So it was brilliant.
I want to ask you a little bit more about, so as a young guy, no real commitments. I know obviously you were with your missus at the time, but no real family commitments and stuff like that. You get given a list of clubs that want to take you. What sort of things are going through your mind? Like, what sort of decisions are you making, and what's the thought process?
Yeah, it was tough, mate. I remember, like I said, with my missus, my now wife at the time, and my parents sat down and went through them. And like I said, Wolves was the first one we visited. We all went up as a family, and they made us feel brilliant, took us for a tour around the stadium and training centre. And then you're like, wow, yeah, I want to move to this club. And then suddenly it's, well, yeah, you are moving out your parents' home, and then you're moving into Wolverhampton, which seemed like a million miles away at the time. Got myself a flat or apartment up there, and suddenly you're living by yourself and feeding for yourself. So yeah, my girlfriend was at college still, and I moved up there by myself. So yeah, there was a whole new pressure to life, living by yourself and sorting that out, and learning how to cook and clean and sort yourself out, mate.
It was a successful season, as you said. You were promoted to the Premier League, made appearances, you scored goals. What was it about that environment? A different environment from being in a team that's trying to avoid relegation to being in a team that's trying to be promoted. What were the differences, and how did you benefit off the back of that?
I think there were big differences, mate. And I look back now, I think the kind of team and squad that Mick McCarthy got together, he kind of got probably a lot of similar players to myself that have been successful in the Championship and League One. and it was probably their biggest opportunity at a club like Wolves to go and prove themselves. And he had a great squad and group together that all came together at the right time and had that drive to go and get promoted. Like I say, we ended up being champions that year in the Championship and getting promoted to the Premier League. And for me personally, at 19, having this all happen so quickly, it was amazing, mate. I couldn't believe I was part of it, really. And it was a great experience. But like I say, suddenly there's that whole new pressure that comes alongside with it, and being able to adapt to that, really.
What sort of stuff did Mick McCarthy do with you when you were there? How did he have an impression on you?
I think the big difference to me when I went there, and the feeling I got from Mick McCarthy and the club at the time, was the culture that he'd really built. And that's not even talking football-wise. I suppose it's just getting the group together and as a group, and how you work for each other and how you respect each other on the pitch, and have that belief, really, when you go out on a Saturday. I think for myself, when I first went there, I think it was massive for me. I remember coming off the bench in my first game away at Plymouth and scored a late equaliser for the team. And for me, on that day, it was amazing. Do you know what I mean? I just scored my first Championship goal, but it made me feel part of it. And as a striker, you touched on before, what are the pressures of a striker? For me, when you move to a new club or something like that, it's getting that first goal and getting off and running. It is so important. And luckily, I got that on my Wolves debut, and that kind of kick-started it.
What was your game like at the time then, obviously at Wolves in that season? Like, what were your strengths? What were the things that you thought you were adding value to the team with? What was going on a match day that you felt successful at?
I think it was coming into a team like that. Touched on formations before. Mick McCarthy did always play with two strikers, so for me that was kind of where I felt at home, because I'd always played that way. Like I say, I was kind of back up that year for Chris Iwelumo, and we had Sylvain Ebanks-Blake at the time, and myself and Andy Keogh were kind of the four strikers. And I suppose my type was Chris Iwelumo, and I was kind of at the start coming off and on the bench for him, and making those appearances, chipping in with my goals here, there. But for me, it was being that physical presence. And I suppose if you're not starting as many games, which I've been used to at Bournemouth, it was being that impact and coming off the bench and scoring those goals. And that for me was an important thing when I first went to Wolves, was to get those goals and have that impact when you come off the bench and kind of make a name for yourself at that level.
We are going to discuss the differences between being a substitute and starting and stuff in a little bit, but at that age and in that environment, something a lot of other younger players struggle with is trying to establish themselves in the team. Over the next few years, after you've been promoted into the Premier League, you end up on 6 different loans at pretty big clubs. And when I say pretty big clubs, I'll name them for you just so people can understand. Leeds, Bristol City, Sheffield United, Norwich, Burnley, and Brighton are all massive clubs, especially for a young guy to be going on loan to. I've also heard you, in interviews talk about that time as being quite tough for you. What was it about that time that was difficult, and what sort of challenges were you faced with?
Yeah, I think you're right. It was a tough time, probably off the field. But when you're a young man and I had no commitments. I wasn't living with my wife at the time. She was at uni and she was doing her thing. So for me, it was quite easy to chuck your bag in the back of the car and drive. Basically lived out of the back of my car for 2 years. Suitcases, you're in different hotels. And for me, it was easy to do that, but it was a tough time. You're living in hotels, literally. You're training with the lads, which is fine. You're in the training ground probably from 9 to 1, 2. But then for the rest of the day, you've not got friends or family near you, and you are in a hotel in the middle of a different city, which you're not used to. So they were tough times in terms of that. But for me personally, I look back with hindsight now and think they were where I learned probably best part of my football, really, I suppose. It's probably where I learnt the game, probably learnt about myself. Big clubs with whole different pressures, mate. Leeds were in League One at the time. I remember getting promoted, and then the rest were Championship clubs that were all going for promotion themselves. Big clubs, as you named. And they were all different experiences, working with different managers, different formations, different ways of playing, different grounds, different crowds. And just to touch on one of them, mate, one crazy season that I had, I remember, because they only did 90-day loans at the time. I remember in January, I went to Sheffield United. They were in a relegation battle at the time, a massive club. Playing at Bramwell Lane was huge, loved it. And in a relegation battle. Went there, and I remember there were 90-day loans, like I say. So in March, I remember being on an international camp with Wales, and they rung me up and said, look, we can't extend it to the end of the season. It looks like we're going to get relegated. But I've just had a phone call from Paul Lambert at Norwich, and he wants to take you to the end of the season. And looked at a table, mate, and I'm at Sheffield United, and looking at Norwich at second in the league. I was thinking, all right, it's not a bad one to jump into. So, like I said before, my suitcase was packed in the back of the car, and I was down in Norwich. Suddenly, I've gone from living in Sheffield for 2 months to down in Norwich, and ended up being part of them being promoted. So that was kind of the highs and lows of going on loan and dealing with different pressures and different clubs and different managers.